Items don't get too much love in the melee scene nowadays, but there was a point in time where knowing how to use them was pretty important knowledge, and part of that knowledge was being aware of what every single Pokemon could do to you and how to avoid it. I'm going to be ranking all of the Pokemon that appear in melee from worst to best based on how much damage they do, their KO potential, how easy they are to avoid, and how much they assist the user. The effectiveness of each Pokemon will also be rated in a hypothetical 1v1 with no other items, no additional Pokemon on screen, and minimal stage hazards affecting the gameplay. Blossom could hypothetically put you to sleep on Icicle Mountain and cause you to get scrolled out of the blast zone, but that's more of a testament to how annoying Icicle Mountain is and not how effective the sleep effect is. Okay, go. Starting with the worst of the worst, we have Goldeen. Not much to say, it flops around and does nothing. The most you'll get out of it is hitting someone with a Pokeball. Yeah, that's about it. Number 29, Ditto. Alright, this one's kinda weird because it never actually made it into the final game. Ditto was likely planned to behave as it does in Ultimate, where it turns into a CPU copy of the user who called it out. Somewhere in development of Melee it was scrapped, but you can access it in the debug menu. If you do this, throwing it out doesn't really do much, it'll pop out of the Pokeball and then just disappear. The only reason it's above Goldeen is because it does have a hitbox, so I guess you can kind of do something with it. Number 28, Wobbuffet. This is everyone's least favorite Pokemon of the game. It doesn't do much except stand there and act like a punching bag. Hitting Wobbuffet or walking into it causes it to use counter and smack you away, but this is also true for the person who called it out. So no matter what, if this is out, it's going to be annoying. Number 27 and 26, Celebi and Mew. These two are just as useless as Goldeen is, but getting them out of a Pokeball is pretty rare, so it's kind of cool whenever it happens. When they do get called out, they'll simply float away doing nothing. And while they don't attack anyone, they do have secret bonuses attached to them that might get you ahead in bonus mode, I guess. Everyone knows is the only real way to play Melee. Number 25, Chansey. Chansey doesn't do nothing. It really feels like it does. It doesn't attack at all, but it throws out eggs which can either heal you, give you an item, or explode. The biggest issue here is that your opponent can be helped by Chansey too. And since most people throw Pokeballs toward their opponent, your opponent will probably get to the eggs first. Another thing about Chansey is that it's one of only a few Pokemon that can be KO'd, so it can actually be knocked off screen before it gives you anything. Number 24, Electrode. Yep, Electrode's really strong, but how often does it actually work as you would tend? If you see this on the stage, you're not going to be going near it, unless you're one of the few people who know that you can throw Electrode right before it explodes, which is kind of interesting. It adds a bit of strategy to using it, and it would probably make it higher on the list if it didn't slow down your animation so much that it almost kills you every single time. Most people will simply move away from Electrode, but in the case that someone does get tempted enough to throw it, they'll probably end up dying, and that could just be the person who throws it out. Number 23, Marill. Marill's just a tiny little guy, and that's about it. It runs around the stage and just kind of slaps you forward until it ultimately ends its own life. And it can kind of wall out certain characters, but it's far too easy to just jump over it since it doesn't leave the ground at all. Not too effective, but very cute. Number 22, Cyndaquil. Bowser's Fire Breath is the worst projectile in the game, and that's Cyndaquil's only move. It can be useful if it luckily spawns near a ledge while your opponent's recovering, but outside of that, it doesn't have much of a presence, and just like Chansey and Marill, you can hit it away. Number 21, Chikorita. Chikorita throws leaves in front of it for a few seconds before disappearing. This can be somewhat helpful to keep opponents off the ground or even lead into an occasional strong attack, but overall, it's too easy to escape from and just kind of easy to avoid altogether. Number 20, Togepi. Togepi's pretty interesting. It can use a few different attacks, 5 in total, all with very different effects. It can use Leech Seed, which gives your opponent a flower, doing damage over time, Powder Snow, which freezes opponents and sends them downward, which is unusual for freezing attacks, Sleep Powder, which puts foes to sleep, Magnitude, which buries opponents, and Nightshade, which blacks out the screen. These can be kind of helpful. It is pretty easy to avoid, and most of the attacks either don't hit aerial opponents or they can be easily escaped from. Plus, if the screen is dark, that obviously affects the player who threw it, meaning that this is kind of an undesirable Pokemon to get. Number 19, Blossom. This one can either be really helpful or completely useless. If used in the right spot, Blossom will put your opponent to sleep, and sometimes this can even keep your opponent asleep indefinitely, or at least until it despawns. In most cases though, once you hear Blossom say its name, you'll just avoid it completely. It is possible to get hit into it, I guess, but for the most part, once you know that it's out, it's pretty easy to stay away. Number 18, Staryu. Staryu's kinda like Chikorita. It uses Swift and shoots a bunch of stars at you, but it works a bit better. It's a lot better at trapping you in the move, and it shoots a lot faster, doing a bit more damage and stays out a bit longer than Chikorita. It also has a hitbox on its body, so it can even launch you away or KO at high percents. On top of this, before shooting, it actually follows you around before locking on and firing straight, which can give a better chance to actually hit, but it's not that difficult to outmaneuver it. Number 17, Unknown. When called out, one Unknown will fly off the screen and will return with a swarm of more more of them. One thing that I found out during testing is that the first Unown actually has a hitbox and can even KO if it hits you in the right spot. The Unown that come back can float by for a few seconds, knock you into the air, and deal some damage, but the biggest advantage here is that they put you into a bad spot where your opponent can hit you away. The direction they fly is completely random, so while this can be kind of helpful, they can also fly somewhere where you might not even be. So while it can be pretty effective, it isn't too uncommon to hear the ominous buzz of Unown without even seeing one at all. Number 16, Charizard. The first of the Kanto starters in Melee, Charizard stays in one place and uses Flamethrower on both sides. This is pretty helpful at making an area of the stage completely off limits to your opponent, and it even has a pretty strong hitbox on its body, so it'll knock away anyone who touches it. While the attack itself is similar to Cyndaquil, it is on both sides, so it covers more space, plus it technically has KO potential. Number 15, Suicune. This is where Pokemon start to have a bit more strengths than weaknesses. Suicune uses Blizzard to damage and potentially freeze certain opponents for a short duration. This does a decent amount of damage, and you can even attack your opponent while they're trapped to do even more. A weird thing that I found though is that some characters can shield during the move, so they can reduce the amount of damage they take, and an even weirder thing is that a lot of light and floaty characters don't even seem to get trapped in it. I don't know if I was doing something wrong, but this is kind of weird. All in all, a decent Pokemon, but the worst legendary for sure. Number 14, Snorlax. Snorlax is kind of the quintessential Pokeball Pokemon in my opinion. When you think Pokeballs and Smash, this is the one that comes to my mind first. It's not too intrusive, but it's very strong in the right scenario. Snorlax appears in every Smash game, and it does pretty much the same thing every single time. It'll land on the ground first, and then jump up high into the air and come back down, and for some reason be like 3 times the size. Sometimes this can be pretty easy to avoid since it's pretty slow, but since it's so gigantic, it's not that hard to combo into it as well. Number 13, Weezing. Yes, Weezing does cover a pretty small area, and it doesn't knock opponents away at all, but if you do manage to get caught in it, you're going to take an insane amount of damage. It is important to acknowledge that this can be DI'd out of, but being realistic, not everyone knows how to DI, and most people who do probably aren't playing with items on too often. Number 12, Clefairy. Clefairy is similar to Togepi in that it uses multiple different attacks with Metronome. The attacks it knows though are a lot different. It can use Gust, Fire Spin, Waterfall, and Self-Destruct. Waterfall is the only one of these that's likely to get a KO because it has a huge vertical area of effect and really strong knockback even at low percents. Gust and Fire Spin are decent, but they're too similar to Suicune and other multi-hits to be considered anything special. And Self-Destruct is just a slightly worse version of Electrode's Explosion. It's really strong, but it doesn't have the same temptation to go near as Electrode has, so do with that what you will. Number 11, Venusaur. Venusaur uses Earthquake, a move it actually can't learn in any of the games it's in at the time, but, you know, whatever. This reaches a pretty large area and only affects grounded opponents. If you happen to call out Venusaur at the right spot, it can be pretty difficult to avoid and can even KO certain characters at high percents. This also makes an entire area of the stage off limits to your opponent, and sometimes that can be more effective than the Pokemon itself. Number 10, Blastoise. The final of the 3 Kanto starters, Blastoise uses Hydro Pump to damage and push players away. It almost acts as a weaker version of Kyogre, which is why I consider it the best of the trio. It's not perfect. While Kyogre will follow you, you can kind of just jump over this one. But keep in mind you do have an opponent who's trying to keep you in a line of fire, and it also has a hitbox on its body, so if you mess up trying to jump over it, you might get launched pretty far away. If it doesn't end up hitting you, it at least makes whatever level it's standing on impractical to access, which again is pretty powerful of an advantage. Number 9, Moltres. Moltres doesn't really do much, it just kind of appears and flies away, but if you touch it, it's instant KO. Most of the time. So sometimes when you touch it from the bottom, it can Meteor you, and as we all know in Melee, you can Meteor cancel, so you can technically survive touching Moltres by Meteor canceling. This took pretty long to set up though, so I doubt it'll ever happen in a real scenario. Most of the time when Moltres comes out, it's pretty easy to play the runaway game and avoid it, but in the case that your opponent gets their hands on you and throws you into it, or, God forbid, it spawns on top of you, you can kiss your stock goodbye. Number 8, Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is honestly just Moltres with an attack after. Touching it doesn't one-hit KO you, but it does knock you back a fair way. After it flies away, it'll come back, appear in the background, and use Sacred Fire. This move's pretty powerful, and it does a lot of damage, but similar to Moltres, it's pretty easy to avoid. Number 7, Scizor. Scizor is generally seen as pretty powerful in Melee. It might be a bit inconsistent, but it is extremely strong. Scizor will spawn and immediately have a hitbox. It'll slash opponents once, then jump up and make its way downward. This movement path seems kinda random, and it can be pretty scary, but it can also be pretty useless if it misses. There's certainly times where it seems like it jumps to its death without doing anything, but there's also plenty of others where it looks like it's intentionally following you and trying to get combos of its own. In general, you won't regret getting Caesar from a Pokeball. It's probably one of the best non-legendaries in the game. Number 6, Articuno. Articuno is kind of like Moltres, but instead of avoiding its body, you have to avoid a giant invisible hitbox that'll freeze you instantly and send you soaring into the blast zone, where if it doesn't kill you, it'll at least do 25 damage. This attack comes out pretty quick, and it's a bit tricky to avoid since you can't see it at all. So honestly, your best bet in surviving this is just running away once you see it. Number 5, Lugia. Lugia is a very powerful legendary, which is guaranteed to KO if it hits. When it appears, it'll fly up just like Ho-Oh, and it'll reappear in the background. Lugia's attack is a bit more sporadic, but it's guaranteed to KO if it hits. And while it does have the same weakness as Ho-Oh that it's a bit slow and predictable, it is so much more dangerous to get hit by. Number 4, Zapdos. The last of the 3 legendary birds, Zapdos uses Thunder Shock almost immediately when released from its Pokeball, and this does a total of 81 damage if you're in it from start to finish. When you're trapped in the move, you can't get knocked away, but your opponent can keep hitting you, which means if you get hit by this move, there's a chance you can get out of it at over 150%, which in my opinion is just as good as killing you. Number 3, Raikou. Raikou's a bit like Venusaur in that it only hits opponents who touch the ground, except this time the hitbox is gigantic, covering entire stages and turning the whole playing field into a game of the floor is lava. If Raikou's in the middle of a stage, nowhere is safe. This move has set knockback, meaning it doesn't send you farther at high percents, which sounds bad, but faster falling characters don't get knocked back high enough and can be comboed out of at any percent. Meaning you can wait for it to loop a bit, they'll take 150 damage, and then anything will send them flying off the stage. The only ways to avoid this are to stay in the air or stay on the ledge, but this is a bit harder to do when there's another player trying to attack you also. Number 2, Entei. Entei caps off the last of the legendary Pokemon with a ginormous and terrifying pillar of fire that does extremely high amount of damage and lasts for what feels like an eternity. The hitbox is a lot larger than it looks, so even if you get kind of close to it, it's probably going to suck you in anyway. And despite what the wiki says, this move is surprisingly difficult to escape from no matter how much I destroy my joysticks DIing to one side. Number 1, the best Pokemon in Melee, by far, is Porygon 2. Hear me out. Porygon 2 uses Tackle, the instant interrelease from its Pokeball, and when I say instant, I mean it spawns with a hitbox. And this isn't just a stationary hitbox like Moltres. Porygon will dash forward in your direction, giving you 0 time to react, and will semi-spike you in the opposite direction, strong enough to KO most characters at stupidly low percents. Also, for some reason, this attack has electric properties, meaning you'll be in hit stun for longer. Combined with the harsh angle it sends you, it's not just extremely good at KOing, but it's really difficult to recover back to the stage after getting hit. Since it's not a legendary Pokemon, you'll see Porygon 2 fairly regularly in a match, which makes it all the more dangerous than the other top tiers. If you see Porygon 2, it's already too late. Given that I worked on this video day in and day out for 3 straight months, I know that none of you will disagree with my list. That's all for this year, thank you, and happy Flag Day.